Sweet. Hello, guys. So essentially, obviously, I'm just going to go through my first presentation here. So essentially, this is just going to be a first video, obviously, so an introduction to sort of my series, and then essentially, it's just going to be about just general training principles. I'm Cole Cavanagh, an exercise scientist, and I currently work at Optimum Nutrition and Training. So that's where you can kind of find me, and then that's my Instagram handle there, and a nice picture of myself. Awesome. So, as the video series continues, obviously I'll be going into more detail about sort of different principles. We can go into all these principles in much depth and more understanding. However, obviously today, for the first video, I'm just going to go over a few of them and just go into a few topics of areas that are up for discussion when we talk about training and periodization and just general principles of training, right? So, essentially what we have here is obviously principle one is specificity. So, what is specificity? So, let's think in terms of when we go to train or conduct any sort of training program, what are we trying to achieve? What is the goal? Do I want to be an endurance runner? Do I want to be a bodybuilder? Because that specificity will dictate how we program, right? So if you want to improve your endurance, you got to focus on, the cardiovascular activities that improve like aerobic capacity, right? If I'm a bodybuilder, am I going to actually lift in like the 1 to 5 rep range? Probably not. That's normally for strength training. So pretty much specificity, very important principle. And in terms of like, your training and your goals, you need to prioritize specificity, right? Because that is going to ultimately dictate the outcomes of your training. So sometimes we get married to certain training that we enjoy, but is it actually serving the specific need of what you're trying to achieve? That's another question. So principle two, obviously a very important one. Everyone hears a lot about this. So this is essentially progressive overload. So overload is generally an increase in intensity, duration, or frequency to stimulate continuous improvement. It's like if we just went into the gym every week and did the same weight, our body's going to adapt to that. Our body likes to be in homeostasis. It likes to be comfortable, right? It's like when we're cutting or bulking, if you're a bodybuilder, it's going to eventually be adaptation. There's going to be adaptive processes that try to slow that, try to hinder that. Body doesn't like to be pushed too far. It likes to be comfortable. It knows that it's safe. It's more alive. It can sustain life at a normal, consistent level, right? That it knows. So in order to obviously get through that, if we think about, the way evolution's worked, or even in terms of our ancestors, our body has to adapt. So say if there's more, strenuous activities, say for example, it's summer or spring and we need to do more lifting or more farming to get our food, we obviously have to adapt to those demands in order to be able to sustain life, right? So that's why our body adapts to those things. That's the best way I sort of recommend anyone when you're learning physiology concepts is just think that even though our brains have evolved very quickly, our physiology is still, thousands of years behind. Doesn't know that our daily intake can be easily achieved by just clicking a button on my phone, and then I'll get my daily worth of calorie intake. So that's always an interesting one that I always put forward to people. So yeah, obviously things have to get harder to solicit adaptation. So that's pretty much progressive overload, regardless of any facet of a specificity that you're applying any programming. Things need to get harder for the adaptation to occur. If it doesn't, the body doesn't see a need to obviously improve. So individual variability. So that's principle 3. So recognizing that every individual responds differently to training. So males and females, they're different, So essentially like females, because of estrogen, they can generally tolerate a bit more volume. They're a little bit less susceptible to muscle damage, I believe, if I'm recalling the literature correctly. So you treat everyone differently, and everyone's coming from a different training age, right? Different genetics, different fitness level, different age, and different training experience, right? You could have someone who's been a chronic endurance runner who's just started lifting weights, therefore they're a beginner. So again, individual variability, very important in sort of programming principles. You can't cookie cutter paste any sort of program. That always requires individual variability, individual specificity. Good. So principle 4, rest and recovery. So I did add a little cheeky graph, but like I said, I'm just going to sort of touch over these principles very generally, and in future videos I can go over these further. So rest and recovery. So adequate rest recovery is essential for preventing overtraining and injury. Balancing training with rest and sleep for optimal recovery and adaptations. So this graph is a nice little graph. They teach us this a lot in sport science and exercise science. Is obviously this is the stress, this is our training. There is a breakdown in recovery, and then there is a supercompensation effect that happens. So we achieve over the baseline of our fitness and / performance. and then obviously we rinse and repeat, right? And then obviously you can sort of see this mimics periodization. And then you can also note that if I was to have this conversation and you're saying you're not getting enough recovery and rest, the stress from your training breaks down and a lot of your resources will just be spent on the recovery and you might just return to baseline. So that's when, like, again, individuality, dosing training correctly comes into it. But again, conversations for the later videos. Rest and recovery, very important. Get your protein in. So frequency and consistency. So regular training sessions, and again, applying that first principle there of specificity, regular training sessions for the specific goal that you're after is always going to be number one effective. If you're trying to gain muscle and you're sort of jumping from modalities, therefore changing, to specificity, you're going to have a hard time sort of getting the adaptations you want. Sweet. Consistency builds habits and leads to better results. So yeah, obviously, as we chronically expose ourselves to a stimulus, and we get more better adaptations as we head forth. And then obviously in terms of like training programs, when you get signed a training program, the reason why it's beneficial to stick to a training program is because there's more motor learning, right? You get more proficient at bench pressing by doing bench pressing. So that's one of the main factors that we need to take into account. Some people like to go in there and change up the workout the whole time. It's completely fine, and I'm all for exercise for life, but in terms of if your goal is very direct, you also need to have a direct approach in your training to achieve those outcomes. Thank you for watching. So this has just been the first video, just sort of gauging how everyone's liking it. Just let me know what you guys think. But this has been the first introductory video on sort of just basic principles of exercise. Cheers, guys.